Welcome. We're back in session with your host Jay of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast. Now let's get into it. All right, I am back again. It is your host, Jay, of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast. And today we have,
Seth Brady.
please introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself.
I'm Seth Brady. I'm a social studies teacher at Naperville Central High School.
Okay, love that. Very short, sweet, to the point. We can get into the nitty gritty of things. Um, because we've been tussling about you being in this chair right now, so I'm super excited.
Well, I've been teaching. This is year 20. I teach mostly cultural classes. So I've taught anthropology, I've taught comparative religions, peace and conflict studies, world cultures, and I teach a capstone class.
Okay, so then you
A family of 3. How's that?
Oh, I love that.
extended?
Family of 3,
Yeah.
children, love children. Well, some of them are my age, but anywho,
You
you
can
should,
love them still.
yeah, you should love this next question that I'm going to ask based on everything that you just said. So, with the point that you're at now, what do you think about social studies now versus what you thought about before you got to this point?
Yeah, so I had a feeling you're going to ask that question. Um, so I think I'll answer it from a teacher's
Mhm.
perspective. I think when I started teaching, I thought about social studies as really, sort of teaching students about different parts of the world or
Mhm.
different religions or political systems or historical periods. And now I've come to really think about it as how do you set students free to
Hmm.
become action takers and change makers in their world, right? Like affecting the things that affect them.
Mhm.
So that's a yeah, big change and much more student driven than it being about me and how I teach a particular class.
Mhm. Okay. You said a lot of good things. I think that one thing that I want to focus on is setting your students free
Yeah.
because, I'm going into teaching very young, very new at this. And so, what, like, over the span of years that you have been teaching, what have you been learning about yourself as not only a teacher, but as a person to go forth and start setting your students free?
Yeah, that's a tough thing to really quantify. I think the big picture, I think I've learned over time, right, is it's not about me,
Hmm.
right? And when you bring down that ego, the paradox is you get so much more than
Hmm.
when you try to control things. I think I guess in another sense, there are sort of 2 strands. One deals with community and how to really honor the human beings that are in your classroom.
Hmm.
And I came to some of that slowly with restorative practice and peace circle practice. And then the other piece I think is just really, um, you know, there is an absolute art and science to actually setting students free, right?
Hmm.
Setting students free is not just do whatever.
Hmm.
It's so figuring that out is something that has taken me, took me 15 years to get there.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm just thinking about like the ways and like you talked about community, which your students talked a lot about. Like they are clearly vulnerable with each other. They've clearly built trust with each other. And in what ways have you taken the factors inside of your classroom and their lives outside of the classroom to foster that trust for them to be able to be vulnerable and have that community that so many of them talked about?
Yeah, I think like and I hope I'm going to answer your question here, but follow up if I don't. Um, One of the things that I think I've been able to do in most of the classes I teach is start the process of social studies with the person,
Mm,
with their experience, right?
mhm,
Where are you coming from, and how does where your experiences, your background, really center the type of social studies you want to do, the types of questions
mhm,
you want to ask and answer. Um, One of the things that I think is so often true of the social studies that I taught before was it was a static social studies,
mhm,
right? It was focusing on another time or another place that seemed to be frozen. And
mm,
I think when I figured out how to orient social studies education to um, students and their concerns in their lives, that social studies became alive and meaningful, and really became lessons
mhm,
about how students can affect change in their own lives and in their communities.
mhm. As I've been going through that, like as I've been in my observations and things, what does it mean to let my ego go? Because also too, I'm in the process of like I'm a student at the same time that I am a teacher. And so we've been talking about the ideas of what does it mean to center your student, to decenter yourself. That does not mean that you as the teacher is invalid in your classroom. That does not mean that you as an educator is invalid in the process. But so often we want results because we want to keep our job. We want results because we have a quota to fill within our different districts. And so I think it's important what you're talking about learning how to like put that ego aside and stop thinking about the teacher outcome or how am I going to be viewed as an educator in the classroom or when is my next paycheck going to come in, because what are my students worrying about? How are they thinking about being perceived in the ways that I'm teaching them? And I think what you said about social studies being stagnant, I think I got like a very good social studies education in high school, but in middle school, I feel like I kept learning about the same thing over and over and over again. Like if we were learning about Black history, it was like picking cotton. Oh, and then we moved on to Rosa Parks and Dr. King. And then yay, freedom. We went from ships from Africa all the way to United States. And we went from here to here. And now look at you being able to learn and be in the classroom. And it's like, huh, I could say all of these things about Rosa Parks sat on the bus. Dr. King had a dream. Malcolm X was quote unquote violent. But it's like, why are we learning these same things over and over again? And what is that hiding from the bigger picture within what we're trying to learn and what we're trying to teach? And I think that's bringing me to another question about like the way that you try to decenter yourself and the way that you try to put your students first, while also like setting boundaries and for them so that way they don't just have, a unset or unclear path for them. How do you think your students see you as a teacher? You have your ideas about how they see you, but how do you think they will answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, but before I answer that, can I say a little bit about what you just
Of
said?
course.
Yeah. So like as you were talking, I was thinking about like, you being a new teacher,
Mhm.
and not that you need advice to me because you're plenty competent, right? But like what would I say to say myself as a new teacher? Like, could I convince myself to do this the
Mhm.
way I teach now? And I think like you're right, like so much of, especially like an early teacher, the way we are being judged is on very traditional
Mhm.
banking models of education, right? Like, can you remember these things? Can you reproduce those things? And that becomes like it became for me like how I measured my own self too, right?
Mhm.
How students are doing on these tests, which are primarily were memory based, although there's some application. That is how I thought of my teaching and myself. And I think like the really like difficult part of that, or the maybe the problematic part of that is um if students aren't positioned as agents, right,
Mhm.
they are the default is they're taking in what someone else thinks is important, and learning in a way that is, as we said before, like stagnant. So it's a real tension between like wanting to be competent as a new teacher and measuring up to like what competency is in other people's eyes, and then knowing in your heart what it is to like set students free,
Mhm.
and really working through that, like, because you need a job, you need to get tenure, right?
Yeah.
But how do you stay true to like your values, and what and really, like you said, like centering students and not yourself. And I think it's a real tension, and maybe something that like has to be worked through.
Mhm.
um but I think there are ways, some of the things with I3 that we've been doing, right? There are ways that you can work through that, right? So like you mentioned, Dr. King, right? And
Mhm.
rather than only talking about what happened, um, reframing that in a way to say like, you know, um, how can the lessons of Dr. King, right? And you
Mhm.
could note them in a particular text or whatever, be used to address X in
Mhm.
your life right now, right? So those lessons, that history now becomes part of your present, right? And
Mhm.
you can address those things, right? And that teaching now becomes meaningful to you and connected to you, and that history intersects with who you are now. So I think there are ways to do that, even with all those other challenges and being judged, et cetera.
Mhm.
You're gonna have to remind me of the original question because I went way off track there.
No, 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 that was perfect. No, I think that was great, and I'm most definitely gonna come back to those points. But the idea that you have your own idea about how your students see you, how do you think that would differ if I was to ask the students how do they see you?
Um, that I mean, I think they mostly see me the way I think they see me, but I think there's also like a lot of like nuance, right?
Mhm.
Like I think I'm an idealist and an optimist, and I like to see things better than they really are.
Mhm.
Um, but I think they, in some ways, like relationships in general, especially, something like you've probably studied already, like that's the core of what we do as
Mhm.
teachers, right? If you're not going to focus on relationship, what is the point?
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and it took me a long time to be able to like say this out loud, but the truth is like most of it is like you need to love those students like they're your own children, right?
Yeah.
And think about them in that context, and then other things come
Mhm.
easy. So like, do I feel like they'd say like, like they might freak out a little like when they say like, does Brady love you? But I think they would, in the context of school, and
Yeah.
the love that a teacher can give to students, like I do in my heart like believe that they feel loved and they feel
Mhm.
that, and I think it's mutual.
Yeah, I love the idea that my students can leave a classroom. First of all, it feels so good to say my students. Like it's just such a nice feeling and experience to have. But even with my observation, like the students were like a little bit sad that I was leaving. They're like, "So who's gonna replace you? Like, where are you going?" And I'm like, "I'm not coming back here. I'm going to another site to observe." And they're like, why?" And it was just nice to like get those cards, like with those nice notes. Even like some of them gave me so many grievances, but it was nice to go through that process with them because I feel like at some point they felt safe with me. They knew that I was not going to judge them. I was not going to police them. We were going to figure out a solution together. And I really enjoyed that. And I see that a lot, like between you and your students and how comfortable they were in the classroom. Just like within this classroom, as soon as you step out the door, is a very different atmosphere, the way that they interact with each other. I do want to go back to a point that you said it took you like a long time, like 15 years to get it right. What contributed to taking so long to get it right? And how are you still building upon those ideas now?
Yeah, when you were saying like they're giving you cards and feeling bad, like I think even getting there for me took like 2 or 3 years, right? Like when students at the beginning of the period started hanging around like where I was sitting, I was like, oh, this is new. Like this is something, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I think like the broad answer to that is um, really about doing and reflecting and documenting how you did and doing it, making tweaks, making adjustments.
Mhm.
Um, I talked a little bit about um, circle, and I think like in general, school as an institution is incredibly dehumanizing,
Yeah,
right? Like,
definitely.
not to like, make this too philosophical, but when you think about like, Foucault, right? Like the
Mhm.
state control is exerted on the body, right?
Mhm.
So we are controlling students' bodies all the time, where they sit, how they sit, when they
Mhm.
can stand, when they can walk around, bells going from place to
Yeah.
another, when they can like uh, um, go to the bathroom or deal with their bodies, right?
Mhm.
So I think like part of my process of thinking about trust and gaining that trust
Mhm.
was learning to figure out ways not just to like myself trust them and like communicate that trust, but bring that trust, I guess, like alive, not just in speech, but in reality. So I taught summer school one time. I taught summer school actually many times. I was teaching an American government class, and I was reading this book, and it was by like a religious studies scholar. And there's just one line in there that said, the only true democratic seating arrangement is the circle. That was it, right?
Hmm.
So I was like, I'm going to put this class in a circle, and I'm going to try to sit there in that circle. This is
Mhm.
before I knew anything about restorative justice circles or anything like that. And that dynamic, that seating arrangement, and we were in desks then, so transformed things without any effort that I was like, this is
Mhm.
something here, right? They began to pass out papers on their own. They
Mhm.
felt more responsibility. They engaged more. There was greater equality. So, and I was like physically at the same level too. So that later, that seating arrangement, I learned like, oh, this isn't my own aha, right? There's a whole restorative uh, history there, right? That goes way
Mhm.
back to all of our indigenous roots, right?
Mhm.
It's the campfire, it's the kitchen table, it's all these places that we're in community as people. And then it became about like how to bring that community
Mhm.
into class. Um, and what I discovered was like, as with circle, right, was essentially there's a talking piece and you pass this around, always clockwise in my belief. Um, and what happened was the norm became to speak
Mhm.
rather than a norm of not speaking. So once people like are in that circle and they begin to speak, uh, now they've invested themselves in something.
Mhm.
They've become a collective vessel, and it's for my taste originally it's like pretty touchy feely, but the results were so impactful and so
Yeah.
different. Whether you're talking about something personal or you're talking about a movie you just watched in class, like with Gandhi or whatever,
Yeah.
the things that would come forward and who they would come forward with um, were so incredible, right? That I realized like, if I don't do this, I'm wasting most of the brain power in this room,
Mhm. Mhm.
and squandering this opportunity to connect.
Yeah. I love the idea that you, when you talk about restorative justice, especially like within the way that you have set up your classroom, because it has so much personality, because you have the circle, I think it's very important that they get the chance to see each other. Because I think that's also like part of the dehumanization is that they're staring at the back of people's heads. And I'm thinking like, we even think of the concept of like Zoom, like school Zoom and or Zoom school. We're looking at screens. We're not even looking at each other. We're not able to be with each other in person. And I think that is very cool the way that you've changed the chemistry of the classroom has changed the chemistry and has changed the bond between the students. But there was something that they said that I thought was very important to like what you also talked about when they said it was one you, but it was multiples of them they could lean on each other. I think that shows like a great form of trust in you. And that shows that like they know that you believe in them so much so to the point where they feel confident enough to support each other without you having to step in. And so like the two questions that I have from there is how did you allow yourself to, take backstage to let them be in that space of like independence? But also, what did it take for you to build that vulnerability for them to like to understand that you believe in them in that way?
Yeah. um I so I I'm going to answer it this way, and you tell me if it's satisfying or not. So w- when I first started teaching this capstone class, right,
Mhm.
which is totally independent and it's completely inquiry based,
Mm, mhm.
that was a dive into inquiry, right? Like we had spent a couple years, we meaning like the teachers that formed their own community and collective around creating global education opportunities for students, or this program called Illinois Global Scholar. But
Mhm.
when it came down to it, um, like I was the teacher and I had to do it for the first time ever,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
So when that class was set up, right, you realize like there's 15 individual projects, so you can't teach the way that
Mm,
that I had been
mhm.
become accustomed to. So I'd start calling students out in the hall for these individual conferences, and I'd hear laughing and giggling and goofing around. And I really struggle with that, because what we talked about
Yeah.
before about how you're judged, and even how I judge myself, was, do I have an ordered classroom? Right. So um letting go of that, and I
Mhm.
had like a retired professor from ISU who helped us with Global Scholar, tremendously helped us.
Mhm.
um I'd call her and say like, this is happening, like they're goofing around, whatever, and she'd be like, no, 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 just trust the process, like you're going to be
Yeah.
okay. And I think like once I saw um that they could be free and do way more incredible things than they would have done had I been micromanaging them.
Mm, mhm.
That allowed me to, weirdly, to like trust the process, which
Yeah.
in turn trusts them. And I
Mm.
think like the other piece is like, um, I realized over time that the process that we all took to like build this program and approach a legislator and
Mhm.
eventually pass a law and then build out this whole program was weirdly exactly the sort of thing we were asking them to do, right? Like, do
Yeah.
this inquiry, connect with experts, take action to affect change. And so like I came to know, especially after that first year, and I'll say like that first year, we were all in it together.
Yeah.
Like I had no idea this is gonna work, right? And so like the like I talk to all those students now still, and
Yeah.
they're out of college. Um, but because they went through it, I knew everyone could,
Mhm.
and I also knew the amazing heights to which students can and do go all the time.
Mhm.
And so like that, the confidence they taught me to put in them,
Mhm.
that is what I can give to students who like, I've got imposter syndrome or I can't do this. It's like, no, no, no. Like you have no idea how awesome you are, right? As a human and
Yeah.
as a researcher and all these other things. Cause like ultimately, like we're all winging it. We wing it better over time, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely better over
yeah.
time. But no, I love the idea that you and your students, you guys are in the same place. And I love how all of your conversations have been connecting with each other about like that idea of you're learning from each other and teaching each other at the same time. And I just love the idea of like you had to be forced into that vulnerability, but trusting the process really allowed you and your students to connect and allowed them to connect to each other. And this was a very, very eye-opening experience for me as a teacher. And I think there we can leave it at that because you have said so many good things. But before we end, obviously, I'm going to ask, what is something that you want the audience to take with them from our conversation?
Um, Gosh, my default with this kind of question would be like, you know, when we're truly like when you have the courage to set students free, right, and
Mhm.
support them, right, towards this high bar, they will do amazing things. Students
Mhm.
always will rise to the occasion if you give them the agency in the space to
Mhm.
do it.
I think from what you said, I'm going to say trust the process because that allows you to trust yourself and open up, which in turn allows you to trust the students and allows them to bring that trust back to you. and allows them to have trust in each other and have a vulnerable and open space. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for joining me, because this was a struggle getting here, but I really truly do appreciate having open conversations with other teachers as to who I want to be as a teacher.
Yeah, thank you, because like hearing you express that made me realize like you taught me something incredible in this conversation. So I really appreciate it.
Yay, are you so happy that you sat down with me now?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for joining another episode of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast. Peace.